At first, it doesn't feel like you are losing yourself. It feels like you are becoming more loving, more flexible, more understanding. You tell yourself that relationships require compromise, that no one is perfect, that love means patience. And so you begin to bend, just a little at first. You quiet a thought here, soften a boundary there, let something slide that once would have felt wrong. It seems harmless. It even feels noble. But what is actually happening is much more subtle and far more dangerous. You are slowly handing over your sense of self piece by piece to a relationship that cannot hold it. People often imagine narcissistic abuse as something loud and obvious, shouting, insults, cruelty on display. But most of the time it is quiet. It moves through small moments, everyday interactions, tiny emotional corrections. You notice that when you express a need, the mood changes. When you share something that matters to you, it is ignored, minimized, or somehow turned into a problem. When you set a boundary, you are made to feel selfish, dramatic, or ungrateful. So you begin to adjust. Not consciously, not with fear, but with hope. You think, if I just explain better, if I'm calmer, if I don't take things so personally, then we'll be okay. This is where the erosion begins. Over time, you start to monitor yourself. You scan the room before you speak. You feel the emotional weather of the other person and adapt accordingly. Your nervous system learns that safety depends on their approval, their mood, their response. And so you shift. What you say, how you say it, even what you feel. Not because you are weak, but because you are trying to stay connected. The human nervous system is wired for attachment before truth. We will abandon ourselves long before we abandon the bond, because to the brain, disconnection feels like death. And so you learn to shrink. You may still function. You go to work, you smile, you appear strong. But inside, something essential has gone quiet. Your opinions feel heavy to carry. Your desires feel inconvenient. Your emotions feel like a burden. Slowly, you stop bringing your whole self into the room. You become a version of you that is easier to manage, easier to please, easier to keep. And you call this love. What is actually happening is a kind of relational dissociation. You are present, but not fully, alive, but not expressed. The person you are with does not want your truth. They want your compliance. They don't want intimacy. They want control disguised as closeness. And because they cannot tolerate being confronted with their own limitations, they unconsciously shape you into someone who reflects back what they need to see. Your role becomes emotional regulation for someone who cannot regulate themselves. This is why it feels so confusing. You are not being told directly to disappear. You are being rewarded when you do. You are praised when you are quiet, accommodating, understanding. You are punished when you are honest, assertive, or emotionally real. Over time, the nervous system learns this pattern. You stop trusting your inner signals. You start to look outside yourself for cues about who you should be. This is how identity begins to dissolve, not through force, but through subtle emotional conditioning. And the most painful part is this. You may not even notice who you've lost until you are far away from them. There comes a moment, often much later, when you pause and realize you don't know what you want anymore. You don't know what you feel unless someone else reacts first. You don't know who you are without someone to mirror you. This is the silent trauma, when your inner life becomes dependent on someone else's perception of you. From a psychological perspective, this is not a character flaw. It is a survival response. Many people who are drawn into narcissistic relationships learned early in life that love required adaptation, that being seen meant being useful, that safety came from reading the room, managing others, staying small. The relationship doesn't create the wound, it reveals it, and then it deepens it. So when you ask yourself, how did I let this happen? The more compassionate question is, what did I learn about love that made this feel familiar? Because this isn't about blame, it's about understanding. When we can see that our self-abandonment was a strategy to survive emotionally, we can begin to release the shame around it. You didn't disappear because you were weak. You disappeared because you were trying to belong. And now the work is not to become someone new, but to return to who you were before you learned to vanish. That return is not dramatic. It is gentle. It begins with listening to the voice inside you that you once silenced. It means allowing yourself to feel anger without justifying it, to feel sadness without apologizing for it, to feel desire without shrinking it. It means slowly trusting your inner experience again, even when it feels unfamiliar, even when it feels unsafe. Because the truth is this: you were never too much. You were simply in a relationship that required you to be less. And healing begins the moment you stop abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable. When you live in a relationship where emotional safety is unpredictable, your body begins to change long before your mind can name what is happening. This is not a metaphor. It is biology. The nervous system does not respond to words, promises, or logic. It responds to patterns. And in a narcissistic dynamic, the pattern is one of inconsistency, tension, and emotional threat. Love is given and withdrawn without warning. Warmth turns into coldness. Connection suddenly becomes punishment. Your body reads this as danger, even when your mind tries to call it romance. So you begin to live on edge. At first it feels like anxiety. Then it becomes your normal. You wake up tired even after sleeping. Your mind races at night, replaying conversations, searching for what you might have done wrong. Your chest feels tight. Your stomach is often in knots. You are always preparing for the next shift in mood, the next subtle criticism, the next withdrawal of affection. This is not because you are broken. It is because your nervous system has learned that it must stay alert to survive. In healthy relationships, the nervous system learns to rest. In abusive ones, it learns to brace. You start scanning for danger in small things: a pause in a text message, a change in tone, a look on their face. Your body reacts before you think. Your heart rate increases. Your breath becomes shallow. Your muscles tighten. These are the same responses we see in people exposed to chronic stress or trauma. And that is what this is: relational trauma, repeated over time, often without visible wounds. This is why it feels so exhausting. You are not just dealing with a difficult person, you are living in a state of ongoing threat. The body is flooded with stress hormones day after day, month after month. Over time, this wears you down. You may experience brain fog, memory problems, irritability, depression, or a sense of emotional numbness. You may feel disconnected from your body or constantly overwhelmed by it. And then you blame yourself for not being strong enough. But strength has nothing to do with this. The nervous system does not care how intelligent you are, how self-aware you are, or how much you understand psychology. It cares about safety. And when safety is inconsistent, the body will do whatever it must to protect you: hypervigilance, people-pleasing, shutting down, overthinking. These are not flaws. They are adaptations. The tragedy is that these adaptations keep you trapped. Because when your body is in survival mode, you lose access to the part of you that can see clearly. You become reactive rather than reflective. You focus on immediate relief rather than long-term truth. You tell yourself that if you can just make them happy, just avoid the next conflict, just stay quiet, then you will finally feel at peace. But the peace never comes because the system itself is the problem. And here is the deeper truth: the narcissistic dynamic depends on your dysregulation. Your anxiety, your self-doubt, your constant emotional labor are not side effects. They are what keep the relationship functioning. As long as you are focused on managing their moods, you are not focused on your own needs. As long as you are trying to restore harmony, you are not questioning whether harmony is even possible here. Your body knows this before you do. That tightening in your chest, that sinking feeling in your stomach, that exhaustion in your bones. These are not random sensations. They are messages. They are the language of a nervous system that has been pushed beyond what it can hold. They are saying, "This is not safe for me." But many of us were taught not to listen to that voice. We were taught to override our bodies, to prioritize others, to endure. We were praised for being strong, patient, forgiving. And so we learned to ignore the signals of distress until they became symptoms, and then illnesses, and then identities. What would happen if you stopped calling it anxiety and started calling it information? What would change if you saw your hypervigilance not as weakness, but as evidence of how hard you have been trying to survive something that hurts you? Healing does not begin with positive thinking. It begins with regulation, with learning how to bring the nervous system out of survival and back into presence. This is slow work. It is gentle. It is not about forcing yourself to feel calm. It is about creating enough safety, inside and outside, for calm to emerge naturally. This may mean stepping away from people who keep you activated. It may mean setting boundaries that feel uncomfortable but necessary. It may mean learning how to breathe, how to feel your body again, how to rest without guilt. These are not luxuries. They are acts of self-respect. Because you were never meant to live in constant alert. You deserve a life where your body can soften, your breath can deepen, and your heart can rest. And the moment you begin to honor that truth, you are already moving out of survival and back into yourself. One of the most devastating effects of loving a narcissist is not what they do to you, but what happens inside you as a result of it. Long after the words are spoken, long after the moments have passed, something begins to shift in the way you experience reality itself. You start to question your own memories, your own feelings, your own perceptions. Not in dramatic ways at first, but in quiet, almost reasonable ways. You tell yourself you must be misremembering. You assume you overreacted. You wonder if you are too sensitive, too emotional, too demanding. And slowly, without realizing it, you hand over the authority of your inner world to someone else. This is the core of gaslighting. Not just being lied to, but being trained to distrust yourself. It doesn't usually arrive as a single event. It happens through repetition. You express a hurt, and you are told it never happened. You describe a pattern, and you are told you are imagining things. You bring up something that felt wrong, and you are told you are the problem for feeling it. Over time, the nervous system learns that honesty leads to confusion, that clarity leads to conflict, so you stop insisting on your truth. You start editing your own experience before you speak it, and this is where something sacred begins to break. We rely on our inner sense of reality to feel grounded in the world. It is how we know who we are, what we value, what matters. When that inner compass is repeatedly undermined, you begin to feel unmoored. You may still function on the outside, but inside there is a constant uncertainty, a subtle fear of being wrong, of misjudging, of not seeing clearly. You look to the other person to define what is real, because your own perception no longer feels safe to trust. From a psychological perspective, this is a form of relational trauma. When someone consistently invalidates your inner world, your mind adapts by disconnecting from it. This is not weakness, it is self-protection. If your truth is not welcome, you learn to hide it even from yourself. But the cost is profound. You may notice that making decisions feels harder. You second-guess yourself. You ask for reassurance about things you once felt confident about. You replay conversations in your head, searching for the right version of events. You may feel like you are always standing on unstable ground, never quite sure what is solid. This is not because you are confused by nature. It is because you were conditioned to be. And here is the deeper layer. When you stop trusting your own reality, you become easier to control. You are less likely to leave, less likely to confront, less likely to set boundaries. Because every time you feel the impulse to act, a voice inside you asks, "What if I'm wrong?" That voice does not belong to you. It was planted there. Yet even now, something in you knows the truth. You feel it in your body. You feel it in the quiet moments when no one is watching. You feel it when the story doesn't quite make sense, when the explanation doesn't quite land. That knowing never fully disappears. It waits. Healing begins when you turn back toward that inner voice, not with certainty, but with curiosity. Instead of asking, "Am I wrong?" you begin to ask, "What am I feeling?" Instead of defending your perception, you start honoring it. You learn to trust small moments of clarity. You write things down, you speak them aloud. You let your experience exist without needing permission. This is not about proving anything to anyone. It is about reclaiming your inner authority. Because when you trust yourself again, the spell breaks, the fog lifts, the world becomes solid. You come back home to your own mind, your own heart, your own truth. And in that return, you discover this: no one has the right to define your reality but you. One of the most insidious dynamics in a relationship with a narcissist is not the cruelty itself, but the way it teaches you to become addicted to the very chaos that harms you. At first, it may seem confusing, almost impossible to explain. You are drawn to them because of their charm, their intensity, or their seeming brilliance. Then, in the same moment, You are pulled into cycles of criticism, withdrawal, or manipulation. The emotional highs and lows are not random. They are part of a pattern that rewires your brain in subtle, profound ways. Your nervous system is not designed to handle constant uncertainty, yet it craves it once it becomes accustomed to it. When the narcissist showers you with attention, approval, or affection, your brain releases dopamine, a chemical associated with reward and pleasure. You feel seen, desired, perhaps even loved. You feel alive. But the pleasure is temporary, and soon it is withdrawn. And withdrawal, too, triggers a neurochemical response, one that mirrors anxiety and craving. You feel a need to restore what you've lost, to return to the warmth, to regain the connection. This push-pull dynamic creates what psychologists call trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is not a moral failing, it is a survival mechanism. The brain interprets intermittent reward as especially powerful. A kind word, a compliment, a small moment of intimacy becomes magnified in importance because it interrupts the otherwise unpredictable environment. You learn to equate chaos with connection because connection is only intermittent. Your body and mind become conditioned to seek validation from someone who is inherently unreliable. The effect is subtle, almost invisible at first. You don't notice that you are constantly recalibrating yourself to their moods, scanning for approval, anticipating withdrawal. You tell yourself, if I can just be better, just say the right thing, just endure a little longer, then I'll have what I want. And what you want is simple, safety, affirmation, love. But your nervous system has learned that these cannot be sustained in this dynamic without cycles of tension. You begin to crave the pattern itself, not because it is healthy, but because it is familiar. This is why leaving, or even considering leaving, is so difficult. It is not simply a matter of willpower. You are addicted to a neurochemical pattern, a relational rhythm that has been hardwired over months or years. Your body reacts before your mind can fully register danger. The longing you feel is not irrational. It is the echo of survival strategies, the imprint of a brain trying to make sense of a relationship that defies sense. And yet, there is another layer to this addiction. The emotional validation that comes in bursts teaches you that your worth is contingent on their attention. You are wired to feel that when they are pleased, you are acceptable. When they are displeased, you are flawed. You internalize their evaluations as truths, and you chase approval not just externally but within yourself. You begin to self-monitor, self-criticize, and self-correct, perpetuating the cycle even in their absence. In a very real way, the trauma becomes self-perpetuating. Understanding this is crucial because it reframes the narrative. You are not weak. You are not gullible. You are biologically responding to a relational pattern that your nervous system was designed to navigate, but one that has been distorted in unhealthy ways. Recognizing the mechanism behind trauma bonding gives you clarity and compassion for yourself. You begin to see that craving the chaos is a response, not a choice, and that breaking the pattern requires more than willpower. It requires recalibration of the body, mind, and heart. Healing begins when you start to provide the reward internally rather than externally. When you learn to soothe your own nervous system to meet your own needs for validation, connection, and safety, the cycles lose their power. You stop chasing highs and fearing lows because you are no longer dependent on their oscillation to feel alive or worthy. You develop an internal rhythm, a steadiness that was impossible in the old dynamic, and in that steadiness you discover a freedom that feels strange at first. You no longer need their chaos to feel complete. This is also where boundaries become transformative. Setting limits is not punishment, it is a signal to your nervous system that you are taking responsibility for your own regulation. You learn to say no without fear, to step away without guilt, and to prioritize your inner equilibrium over external drama. And with each boundary, the brain begins to rewire itself. The craving diminishes, the intensity of longing fades, and the body remembers that it can rest without constant vigilance. Eventually, the realization dawns that the attachment to chaos was never about them. It was about survival, about coping, about trying to feel secure in a world that never felt predictable. You begin to distinguish between love and manipulation, presence and performance, intimacy and control. And as clarity grows, the patterns that once ensnared you lose their grip. The silent trauma of loving a narcissist is not just the pain inflicted, It is the way the brain and body are trained to seek what harms you. But awareness is the first step toward liberation. When you recognize the cycle and you see the neurochemical hooks for what they are, you can step out. And stepping out is not merely a choice. It is a reclaiming of your nervous system, your autonomy, and your life. You were never meant to feel alive only in moments of chaos. You were always meant to live in steadiness, presence, and self-possession. One of the deepest wounds that comes from loving a narcissist is not the arguments, the betrayals, or even the emotional manipulation. It is the shame you carry afterward. This is not the shame of having done something wrong in the conventional sense. It is a shame that is projected onto you, absorbed silently, and internalized until it feels like it belongs to your very self. The narcissist does not create shame haphazardly. It is woven into the fabric of the relationship, part of the system that keeps you compliant, self-doubting, and tethered to them. From the beginning, narcissists have an uncanny way of making you feel responsible for their moods, their disappointments, their failures. If they are irritated, you must have caused it. If they are distant, it is because you are inadequate. If they are angry, it is because you pushed too far. And this is not always explicit. Often it is subtle, almost imperceptible. A sigh, a raised eyebrow, a withheld word of praise. But the effect is cumulative. You begin to carry the weight of emotions that are not yours, and over time you start to believe that the weight is deserved. Shame, in this context, becomes a quiet companion. It sits beneath your consciousness, influencing how you make decisions, how you speak, and how you view yourself. You apologize too much, even when you have done nothing wrong. You shrink in spaces where your presence should be welcomed. You minimize your achievements, your needs, your desires, because somewhere deep down, you have absorbed the idea that you are too much or not enough. And the cruel paradox is that the more you internalize this shame, the more the narcissist benefits. Your self-doubt keeps you tethered, perpetuating the cycle of control without overt coercion. This shame is also social. Narcissists are adept at shaping how others see you, often indirectly. They may share distortions, exaggerate faults, or quietly undermine your credibility, all while presenting themselves as reasonable, kind, or even concerned. Those outside the relationship may sense a tension they cannot define, or worse, may believe the narrative the narcissist presents. The shame becomes both internal and external. It is in how you see yourself, and in how you imagine others see you. This dual pressure compounds the trauma, making escape feel not only emotionally difficult but socially fraught. What makes this shame especially insidious is its subtlety. Unlike overt abuse, which shocks the nervous system and triggers defensive responses, narcissistic shame seeps in quietly. It becomes a lens through which you perceive the world. You may not realize it, but it colors every interaction, every self-assessment, every aspiration. You begin to censor yourself, to preemptively mitigate criticism, to defer your desires for the imagined comfort of others. And because it is internalized, it becomes almost invisible, a silent critic that you carry within you everywhere you go. Yet understanding the origin of this shame is crucial. It is not a reflection of your worth, our morality, or your capacity for love. It is a reflection of the relational system in which you were entangled, a system designed consciously or unconsciously to project insecurity outward and absorb compliance inward. Recognizing this is the first step toward liberation. Once you see that the shame is borrowed, a residue of someone else's dysfunction, it begins to lose its grip. It no longer defines you. Healing this internalized shame is not about arguing with it. It is not about proving to yourself that you are right or good enough, because the narcissistic lens has always been skewed. Healing begins with witness. Witnessing your own experience with compassion, without judgment, without defense, without striving to meet the impossible standard of someone else's approval. It begins with allowing yourself to feel that you were burdened unfairly, to acknowledge that you carried a weight that was never yours to bear. And then, slowly, you begin to reclaim yourself. You name the emotions, separate them from your identity, and observe them without letting them dictate your behavior. You learn to say, in quiet, firm ways, "This is not mine. This does not define me." With each assertion, each boundary, each act of self-respect, the borrowed shame loses its potency. Your nervous system begins to recognize that it can relax, that it does not need to brace for judgment at every turn. Your mind learns to trust your own perceptions, your own feelings, your own inner authority. There's a deep philosophical truth here. Shame thrives in concealment. It grows in silence, in isolation, in the belief that you are alone in carrying it. Speaking it aloud, naming it, sharing it with a safe witness breaks its spell. By articulating what you have endured, you not only validate your own experience, but also dismantle the false power the narcissist's projections once held over you. Liberation from this shame is not a single moment. It is a process of recognition, assertion, and embodiment. It is a reclamation of the parts of yourself that you were taught to hide, a reintegration of your wholeness. And this is where true resilience emerges. When you no longer carry shame that is not yours, you begin to operate from a place of authenticity rather than fear. You speak with clarity, act with integrity, and engage with the world from a center that is your own. The trauma, while it has left its marks, no longer dictates your life. You learn to inhabit your body without apology, to express your needs without guilt, to love without self-effacement. You discover that the internalization of another's dysfunction does not have to become your reality. The silent trauma of carrying projected shame is perhaps the most invisible wound in a narcissistic relationship, yet it is also the one that, once recognized and reclaimed, allows for the most profound transformation. By naming it, witnessing it, and separating it from your sense of self, you create the conditions for freedom. You step out of the shadow, the narcissist cast over your inner world, and into the light of your own inherent dignity. You were never responsible for their feelings, their failures, or their projections. You were only ever responsible for your own truth, and reclaiming that truth is the moment you begin to heal. By the time you reach the point of recognizing the full impact of loving a narcissist, you begin to see that the most profound damage is not external, it is internal. It resides not in the words spoken to you, nor in the betrayals you endured, but in the subtle fragmentation of your sense of self. Over time, you realize that you were not merely in a difficult relationship, you were in a relationship that demanded pieces of you in ways that were unsustainable, unacknowledged, and deeply invisible. And this realization, while painful, becomes the doorway to healing because it allows you to confront the truth without shame or distortion. One of the central ways this fragmentation occurs is through the suppression of authentic emotional experience. Narcissists, by their very nature, require that the world revolve around their perception, their comfort, their needs. Your emotions, your perspective, your voice are often met with dismissal, ridicule, or manipulation. Expressing them too fully can provoke anger, withdrawal, or even strategic punishment. Over time, the natural response is not rebellion but containment. You learn to store your feelings away, to censor your expression, to monitor your internal states as carefully as you monitor your external behaviors. And this containment is invisible trauma. It erodes your sense of belonging in your own body and mind. When emotional suppression becomes habitual, you begin to lose touch with your own signals. Anger, which is a boundary marker, becomes shame. Sadness, which is a message of unmet need, becomes anxiety or guilt. Joy, which is a recognition of flourishing, becomes rare or muted because it exists outside the parameters of the narcissist's approval. You live instead in a muted emotional spectrum, where safety is equated with invisibility and peace is equated with compliance. And what you are left with is not merely exhaustion or confusion. It is the slow, almost imperceptible erosion of self-recognition. This erosion extends into identity. In a narcissistic relationship, who you are is constantly being negotiated in the shadow of someone else's demands. You may begin to define yourself through the lens of their approval, imagining your worth in relation to their fluctuating gaze. Your goals, preferences, and even memories may be filtered through the question, will this make them happy, uncomfortable, proud, angry? You stop anchoring yourself in your own values, because the social and emotional climate you inhabit is one that punishes autonomy. Autonomy feels risky, even dangerous, so it is minimized, postponed, or suppressed entirely. The cumulative effect is a fragmented self. There is a part of you that remembers what you love, what you value, and what makes you feel alive, but that part has been compartmentalized, often deep within the psyche. Another part exists in constant vigilance, scanning for danger, anticipating criticism, negotiating moods. Anat. Her part negotiates the social performance of being acceptable, reasonable, agreeable. Each part is real, yet they do not inhabit the same space harmoniously. This dissonance is exhausting, disorienting, and profoundly isolating because it feels as though the self you inhabit publicly is not the self you feel internally. You begin to wonder whether the authentic self is even accessible anymore. Recovery from this internal fragmentation is not about fixing yourself in a conventional sense, nor is it about undoing all the damage at once. It is about reintegration, allowing the disparate parts of your experience to be recognized, witnessed, and welcomed back into conscious life. This requires a radical attention to self-awareness, often guided by practices of reflection, therapy, or somatic work. It involves learning to listen to the body again, to feel without judgment, to honor emotions as valid indicators rather than signs of weakness. It involves observing patterns of thought and behavior without shame, acknowledging how survival strategies served a purpose, and choosing which ones still serve and which can be released. An essential component of this reintegration is reclaiming personal boundaries. For too long, your emotional, physical, and psychological boundaries were either ignored or manipulated. Reestablishing them is not an act of aggression. It is an act of self-respect and recognition of your intrinsic worth. Boundaries are not a denial of care. They are a declaration that your interior world is yours to steward, that your energy and attention are precious, and that safety is a prerequisite for genuine connection. Another key element is reclaiming narrative authority. Narcissistic relationships are full of distortions, gaslighting, and subtle invalidations that can leave you questioning your memory and perception. Healing requires you to take back your story, to name events, feelings, and responses truthfully, without needing external validation. Writing, speaking, or otherwise documenting your experience allows the mind to reconstruct a coherent narrative in which you are not the villain, the problem, or the passive victim. You are a participant, yes, but one with agency and moral and emotional integrity. Ultimately, healing from the silent trauma of loving a narcissist is about cultivating a new relationship with yourself, one that is rooted in acceptance, compassion, and agency. It is about learning to inhabit your body fully, to trust your perceptions, to honor your feelings, and to embrace your authentic desires. The process is slow because the nervous system has to relearn safety, because emotional patterns have to be recalibrated, and because old shame must be disentangled from authentic self-worth. But it is possible, and it is transformative. The truth, however, is this. The narcissist may have controlled your environment, projected your shame, and manipulated your emotions, but they never had ownership of your essence. That core, the part of you that experiences wonder, love, curiosity, and resilience, remains intact. It may be buried, obscured, or bruised, but it has not been destroyed. The process of reintegration, reclamation, and restoration is the work of uncovering that core and allowing it to live freely again. And so as you move through the recovery process, you begin to recognize something profound. The trauma was not a statement about your value. It was a reflection of the relational system in which you were ensnared. Once that system is left behind, once the cycles of control and invalidation are understood, once the body, mind, and heart are nurtured, the soul's resilience becomes evident. You rediscover your capacity for intimacy, joy, and connection, not contingent upon the manipulation of others, but grounded in the authenticity of your own being. You were never meant to be diminished to survive someone else's need for control. You were never meant to carry their projections as your truth. And the moment you reclaim your inner life, your body, your mind, and your heart, you step into a freedom that is entirely yours, one that no narcissist, no manipulation, no external force can ever take away.